On May 18, 1927, the Bath school disaster exposed the horrors of internal violence when Andrew Kehoe, a disgruntled school board member, unleashed a meticulously planned bombing on the Bath Consolidated School. His detonation of over 600 pounds of dynamite and pyrotol killed 44 people, 38 children and 6 adults, and injured scores more. This act was the deadliest instance of school violence in American history, an unprecedented form of terror stemming not from an external threat, but from within the community itself. The Bath bombing revealed vulnerabilities that no amount of fire drills or evacuation plans could address. The potential for calculated, intentional destruction originating inside a trusted institution. In the aftermath, the school was demolished and rebuilt, yet the disaster did not ignite a broad national reckoning or swift policy overhaul. Unlike the fire tragedies that had led to mandated safety standards, the Bath disaster prompted localized engineering reviews and some regulations related to construction, but largely failed to spur widespread awareness or legislative change addressing internal security threats. The muted national response to such a grievous loss speaks to the challenges of recognizing and legislating against malevolent insiders and explosive violence in that era. In the early spring of 1999, the serene halls of Columbine High School in Littleton, Colorado, were shattered by a chilling and calculated attack that would forever alter the landscape of American education. On April 20th, 2 senior students, armed with firearms and explosives, unleashed a violent rampage that claimed the lives of 13 innocent victims, 12 students and 1 teacher, before turning their weapons on themselves. This massacre was not just an isolated tragedy, but a seismic event that catapulted the nation into an era where the specter of gun violence loomed ominously over academic sanctuaries once thought inviolable. Columbine marked a watershed moment, altering public consciousness and forcing a radical re-evaluation of school security. Before this massacre, the idea that schools could be targets of such devastating gun violence was, for many, unthinkable. The attack exposed deep vulnerabilities in school preparedness, law enforcement response, and preventive measures. It carved a grim new reality in which the safety of students and staff could no longer be taken for granted, and ignited urgent debates on how to reconcile security with the educational mission. Immediate legislative responses came swiftly as policymakers grappled with the demand for action. While laws like the Gun-Free Schools Act of 1994 already enforced strict prohibitions on firearms on school grounds, Columbine emphasized the pressing need for rigorous enforcement and more comprehensive strategies. Federal investment in physical security surged, with metal detectors, surveillance systems, and the deployment of school resource officers becoming widespread across the nation's schools. By the early 2000s, billions of dollars were funneled into programs aimed at hardening schools against similar threats. Security cameras multiplied, access points were fortified, and every new school blueprint had to consider controlled entryways and secured vestibules. Perhaps one of the most profound transformations was the institutionalization of lockdown drills. Before Columbine, the concept of locking down a school in the face of a violent attacker was rarely practiced, almost foreign in mainstream emergency preparedness. Following the massacre, lockdown procedures became a mandated and routine part of school life. What started as scarce and irregular drills evolved into near-daily rituals by the middle of the next decade. For many students and staff, these drills replaced a sense of safety with an omnipresent undercurrent of fear. Schools became places where the possibility of violence was rehearsed and normalized. This transition bore a heavy psychological toll. Students, some barely out of elementary school, found themselves trapped not only by physical lockdowns, but in a mental loop of anxiety and anticipation. The relentless drills blurred the lines between preparation and trauma, fostering stress, fear, and a pervasive sense that violence was never far away. Teachers and administrators were tasked with balancing the practicality of emergency readiness against the invisible scars left on developing minds, a tension that would fuel ongoing debates about the true cost of school safety policies. Simultaneously, law enforcement protocols underwent a seismic shift. The tragedy revealed the fatal consequences of the then standard approach, establishing perimeters and awaiting specialized tactical teams. During the 47 harrowing minutes of the Columbine attack, police officers largely secured the perimeter, but did not immediately engage the shooters inside the school, a delay that cost lives. In response, police training across the country pivoted towards rapid shooter engagement. The new doctrine emphasized immediate confrontation, coordinated command, and swift action, designed to neutralize threats before they could inflict further harm. This evolution in emergency response heralded a darker, more urgent tone in the role of law enforcement within educational settings. Yet, the aftermath of Columbine did not yield easy answers or universal agreement. The drive to physically safeguard schools brought with it unforeseen complications. The physical environment of education morphed. A place once open and inviting gradually took on the starkness of a fortress. Metal detectors and surveillance cameras, while intended to deter, also introduced atmospheres of suspicion. The constant presence of school resource officers, uniformed figures of authority, altered the dynamics between students and the institutions that served them. Critics began to question whether these visible security measures truly enhanced safety or merely created an illusion, a phenomenon sometimes called security theater. More worryingly, the balance between ensuring physical safety and nurturing mental health emerged as a battleground. The policies encouraged by Columbine's legacy often prioritized physical barriers and law enforcement presence at the expense of psychological well-being. Students absorbed the constant reminders of danger embedded in drills, locked doors, and surveillance cameras, sometimes experiencing increased anxiety, depression, and stress-related symptoms. Neurodivergent students, in particular, faced challenges in distinguishing drills from reality, heightening feelings of vulnerability and fear. The relentless intensity of preparedness, though designed to protect, risked transforming schools from spaces of learning into places of ongoing trauma. Columbine also initiated a paradigm shift in violence prevention. Rather than solely relying on reactive measures, educators and law enforcement began focusing on early threat detection through behavioral assessment. The understanding that perpetrators often leave warning signs, be it in writings, social media posts, or behavioral changes, prompted the development of threat assessment teams within schools. These multidisciplinary groups were tasked with evaluating risks, intervening early, and coordinating with law enforcement and mental health professionals. This approach acknowledged the complex origins of violent acts, aiming to prevent tragedies by addressing underlying issues before they escalated. The ripple effects of Columbine's tragedy rippled beyond physical and procedural changes. It spurred a profound conversation about the values embodied in school culture and public policy. Questions arose. How can schools maintain openness and trust while bolstering security? How do we safeguard students without instilling fear? How do resources balance between physical defenses and mental health supports? The answers remain elusive as educators, policymakers, parents, and communities continue to wrestle with these challenges decades later. As this new era in school safety took shape, the Columbine massacre stood as a stark, unyielding reminder of the fragility and complexity of protection. It transformed American schools fundamentally and forever, casting long shadows that extend into every corner of education, safety, and community life. The legacy of that April day is etched in the halls where drills are rehearsed, in law enforcement training protocols, and in the ongoing debates about how best to secure the sanctuaries where young lives should flourish. This chapter closes with the sobering truth that while physical security measures and rapid response tactics are vital, they are but one dimension of a multifaceted problem. The tension between safety and psychological well-being, birthed by Columbine, continues to divide experts and communities alike, setting the stage for subsequent tragedies and responses that will be explored in the chapters ahead. The story of Columbine marks not an end, but the beginning of an ongoing, fraught journey towards safer, healthier schools for all. In the years following Columbine, the American landscape of school safety underwent profound transformations, shaped irrevocably by three defining tragedies: Virginia Tech in 2007, Sandy Hook in 2012, and Parkland in 2018. Each incident not only renewed public attention to the dangers faced on educational campuses, but also pushed the country toward new paradigms of preparedness, policy, and activism. These events, searing in their tragedy, forced the nation to confront the complex interplay of trauma and change, ultimately broadening the conversation about how and where our students learn and live. On a spring day in 2007, Virginia Tech became the site of the deadliest mass shooting on a college campus in U.S. history. A lone gunman took the lives of 32 students and professors, leaving a community and a nation in shock. Prior to this massacre, discourse around school violence had primarily focused on K-12 education, but Virginia Tech expanded the conversation dramatically, thrusting higher education institutions into the spotlight. The tragedy exposed critical vulnerabilities in college safety, particularly around communication and mental health. One of the most immediate and consequential responses was the widespread adoption of emergency notification systems across universities nationwide. Before Virginia Tech, the use of mobile phone text messaging alerts was alarmingly rare. Less than 5% of institutions utilize such technology. The shock of the shooting prompted a seismic shift. Within a short time, more than 75% of institutions had either implemented or planned to acquire similar systems. Colleges enhanced existing public address systems, integrated voice messages to campus phone networks, and developed protocols to ensure rapid, campus-wide communication in times of crisis. The failure of timely notification at Virginia Tech had tragically cost lives, illustrating that speed in alerting students and staff was as vital as the physical security of campus buildings. Beyond improved communication, Virginia Tech catalyzed a nationwide reassessment of campus security policies, especially around behavioral recognition and mental health support. Universities began acknowledging the essential role of mental health in campus safety, integrating care teams and threat assessment groups to monitor and address concerning student behavior proactively. This represented a vital shift, from merely reacting to violence after it occurred to identifying warning signs before tragedy struck. Faculty and staff received training to recognize disruptive, threatening, or otherwise alarming behavior, and formal channels were established to raise concerns. These measures sought not only to enhance physical safety, but also to nurture a supportive, vigilant community attuned to the needs and struggles of its members. The emotional toll of Virginia Tech resonated far beyond higher education. Yet, the tragedy at Sandy Hook Elementary School in 2012 pushed the trauma and the national conversation to a new and wrenching depth. The killing of 20 children, all of them 6 and 7-year-olds, alongside 6 educators, shattered the nation's sense of childhood innocence and the sanctity of elementary schools. Sandy Hook illuminated the devastating intersection of gun violence and the world's most vulnerable, sparking fierce debates on gun control measures at every level of government. In the wake of Sandy Hook, active shooter drills, once a rarity and largely reserved for specialized emergency responders, were normalized in schools across the country, even with the youngest children. Within just 3 years, the number of schools conducting lockdown drills soared to 95%. This normalization of preparedness drills embedded trauma within the daily educational experience, creating an omnipresent awareness of potential violence. While these drills were intended to save lives by preparing students and staff for the unimaginable, they also exacted a psychological cost. Families, educators, and experts voiced concerns over the lasting emotional impact on children, who were repeatedly rehearsing scenarios of fear, confusion, and potential harm. Connecticut's response to Sandy Hook was swift and comprehensive. Governor Daniel P. Malloy established the Sandy Hook Advisory Commission, charged with assessing existing laws, policies, and practices and crafting recommendations designed to reduce the chances of future tragedies. Their work focused holistically on school design and operations, law enforcement coordination, emergency response capabilities, and the mental well-being of students and educators. These recommendations aim to create safer school environments while directly addressing the psychological wounds inflicted by the trauma. Just 6 years later, the story of school violence and response took on an unprecedented dynamic at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida. The shooting there claimed 17 lives, but also ignited a youth-led movement that would reshape the national discourse on gun violence and school safety. The resilience and determination of the surviving students, transforming grief into activism, marked a pivotal moment in the history of school safety. These young advocates mobilized protests, organized walkouts, and ultimately changed the tenor of legislative engagement. Their efforts led to a series of significant policy shifts, beginning in Florida with the passage of the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School Public Safety Act in 2018. This landmark legislation expanded school-based mental health support, enhanced security measures, limited access to firearms on campus, and included the enactment of red flag laws to remove weapons from individuals deemed a threat. Florida continued to refine and build upon these measures, underscoring a sustained commitment spurred by grassroots activism. At the federal level, the wave of youth-driven advocacy culminated in substantial increases in funding for school safety programs. The Student Support and Academic Enrichment Program experienced growth from $400 million to over $1 billion, channeling resources to violence prevention, mental health counseling, and intervention efforts. Additionally, the Stop School Violence Act injected $75 million into initiatives designed to foster communication between schools and law enforcement, enhance threat assessment programs, and implement safety technologies. These policy victories underscored a critical new force in American gun violence prevention, the voices of survivors themselves, drawing national attention to the vulnerabilities faced by students and demanding a departure from inaction. Together, Virginia Tech, Sandy Hook, and Parkland mark a transformative era in American school safety. Their legacies intertwine trauma with policy, activism with legislation, and vulnerability with resilience. Each tragedy expanded the boundaries of how we understand and approach safety. Higher education campuses became focal points. The youngest students rehearsed survival in lockdown drills, and survivors stepped into the spotlight as agents of change. The early illusion of schools as impenetrable sanctuaries gave way to a somber recognition of persistent risks, but also to a profound awakening, one driven by clear-eyed resolve to protect the most vulnerable and to forge pathways towards safer futures. These seismic shifts in national reckoning continue to ripple outward. The lessons learned from these tragedies fuel ongoing debates about balancing physical security enhancements with the imperative to support mental health, about honoring trauma while avoiding the militarization of educational spaces, and about empowering communities to engage actively in prevention efforts. The epoch defined by Virginia Tech, Sandy Hook, and Parkland stands as a testament to the complex challenges and the enduring hope embedded in America's journey toward truly safe schools, a journey propelled above all by the courage and voices of those who have endured the silence of loss and chosen to speak. The tragic shooting at Robb Elementary School in Uvalde, Texas in 2022 serves as a harrowing chapter in the ongoing national struggle to secure America's schools. On that grim day, despite layers of security and protocols designed to protect children, the response to the active shooter was delayed catastrophically. Nearly 400 law enforcement officers, equipped with training and resources, inexplicably waited over an hour before confronting the gunman barricaded inside a classroom. This glaring failure of leadership, coordination, and tactical decision-making resulted in the deaths of 21 innocent victims, 19 children and 2 teachers, and ignited a profound outcry across the country. The Uvalde tragedy starkly illuminated not only the limits of physical security measures, but the systemic breakdowns within emergency response itself. In the wake of Uvalde, the nation's attention returned with renewed urgency to how schools prepare for and respond to violent threats. It spurred a legislative reckoning both federally and within states, aiming to rectify the fractures that allowed such loss to escalate. The bipartisan Safer Communities Act, enacted shortly after the shooting, allocated significant funding to improve mental health services, enforce enhanced background checks on young gun purchasers, and bolster crisis intervention programs. At the state level, Texas enacted the Uvalde Strong Act, legislation demanding more robust interagency cooperation among schools, local law enforcement, and emergency medical responders. This included mandated training on active shooter scenarios for all peace officers and the establishment of standardized, coordinated response protocols. These reforms underscored a pivotal lesson. Safety is not solely about the presence of security technology or personnel, but about seamless teamwork, clear leadership, and preparedness practiced and enforced across agencies. Yet, Uvalde also deepened a contentious national debate over the very nature and efficacy of physical security in schools. The district itself had invested heavily in measures considered state-of-the-art, expanding police presence, doubling security budgets, enhancing camera systems, managing visitor access, and deploying threat assessment teams before the tragedy occurred. Still, these measures could not prevent the heartbreaking outcome, exposing the stark reality that fortifying school campuses with fences, cameras, and armed officers, while politically and publicly palatable, is not a panacea. Many community members, still raw with grief, voiced profound distrust and frustration, especially towards officers whose inaction cost lives. This contradiction fuels broader questions about the role of hardening schools, transforming them into fortress-like environments, and whether these efforts truly keep children safer or merely create an illusion of security. Research increasingly challenges the effectiveness of physical fortifications and school policing, showing little measurable impact on preventing shootings while exacerbating other serious issues. One such consequence is the school-to-prison pipeline, where increased law enforcement presence leads to higher rates of student arrests and disciplinary actions, disproportionately affecting marginalized groups such as Black students and those with disabilities. These punitive approaches, driven in part by security imperatives, risk criminalizing students rather than supporting them, creating communities of mistrust within educational settings. Moreover, the psychological toll of school safety measures cannot be overlooked. Active shooter drills, now ubiquitous even for the youngest students, were cemented as a standard practice following Sandy Hook and other tragedies. While intended to prepare students and staff for worst-case scenarios, these drills often generate fear, anxiety, and trauma. Children may perceive schools not as safe havens for learning, but as places where danger is imminent. Particularly vulnerable are neurodivergent students who may struggle to differentiate drills from genuine threats, fostering chronic stress rather than reassurance. The well-intentioned physical preparedness paradoxically undermines psychological well-being, leaving educators and policymakers to grapple with conflicting priorities: readiness versus mental health. Balancing the architectural demands of security with the nurturing qualities of a learning environment epitomizes another complex challenge brought to light by recent school tragedies. Contemporary school design increasingly incorporates controlled access points, secured vestibules, surveillance, and reinforced barriers, all intended to deter and delay potential threats. Yet these fortress-like protections risk transforming schools into cold, institutional spaces that stifle the openness, creativity, and sense of community essential to education. Architects and school leaders must weigh how to create spaces that safeguard students while fostering psychological safety and belonging, recognizing that the physical environment profoundly influences emotional and academic outcomes. This dilemma continues to provoke innovative thinking, seeking designs that integrate security seamlessly without compromising the warmth and accessibility of schools. Perhaps most critically, the discourse following Uvalde and echoed in the subsequent legislation is a stark reminder of the persistent under-realization of mental health as a cornerstone of school safety. While substantial federal funding now supports school-based mental health services and crisis interventions, the implementation often lags behind the investments poured into physical fortification and policing. Many advocates argue that proactive, accessible mental health care and early behavioral interventions hold the greatest promise for preventing violence. Identifying and addressing warning signs before they escalate remains a vital yet insufficiently prioritized strategy. The dissonance between spending on armed security versus therapeutic support reflects larger societal challenges in understanding and addressing the roots of violence rather than its symptoms. As we look ahead, the path to safer schools is neither simple nor linear. The lessons of Uvalde compel a recognition that school safety is an evolving, multifaceted battlefield, laden with complex trade-offs and unintended consequences. Every measure taken, whether locking doors tighter, increasing law enforcement presence, or conducting drills, carries potential social, ethical, and psychological costs that require careful, ongoing evaluation. The quest is to find a balance, fostering environments where children feel protected physically and emotionally, where vigilance is paired with empathy and innovation, and where student voices and needs shape responsive, just policies. The exigencies facing educators, lawmakers, and communities demand continued vigilance and humility. Progress must be measured not just in dollars spent or technologies deployed, but in fostering trusting, inclusive schools that prevent violence through connection, understanding, and care. The shadows cast by tragedies like Uvalde remind us that, while threats may be inevitable, the full realization of safety depends on how society chooses to respond, always remembering the delicate human lives at the heart of every lesson learned.